over 50 years now, boys and girls and mums and dads have read and reread Kenneth Grahame's magical story of Mr. Toad and his friends Ratty, Mole and Badger. 4 animals who were sometimes so stupid and sometimes so wise that they were just like human beings. For those who've not yet had the pleasure of their company, and for the thousands who'd like to meet them again, this is the story of The Wind in the Willows. There is no doubt that soft earth and a warm covering of leaves do make a far more comfortable bed than the straw and cold stone floor of a prison cell. And that was why the toad slept so well that night in the hollow of the old tree. What woke him was partly the bright sunlight streaming in on him and partly the exceeding coldness of his toes, which was not surprising, since the size of the hollow dictated that one end of Toad had to protrude outside the tree, and he'd reasoned that if something had to be chilled, then better his toes than his head. He sat up, rubbing his eyes first and his complaining toes next, and wondered for a moment where he was. He looked for the familiar stone wall and little barred window of his prison, and then his heart leapt as he remembered everything that had happened the previous day, and that above all he was free. Free! The thought and the word alone were worth 50 blankets. He was warm from end to end as he leapt into the jolly world outside the hollow. The morning sun flooded the wood, dispelling all the nervous terrors of yesterday, and Toad set off on his way in the happiest of spirits. He had all the world to himself that early summer morning, but the woods and fields, even the road itself when he reached it, seemed lonely, and Toad needed desperately to find someone who'd say which way that lonely road was pointing. Not knowing which direction, if any, led to safety, the Toad decided to head for a small canal a short distance ahead. It ambled along side by side with the road for many a mile. But, like the road, the canal was also unwilling to talk to strangers about its destination. Then, round the bend came plodding a solitary horse, stooping forward in anxious thought. From rope traces attached to his collar stretched a long line that led, dripping, down into the water. Toad let the horse pass and stood waiting for what the fates were sending him. With a pleasant swirl of quiet water at its blunt bow, the barge slid up alongside of him, its gaily painted gunwale level with the towing path. Its sole occupant, a big, stout woman, wearing a linen sunbonnet, one brawny arm laying along the tiller. "A nice morning, ma'am," she remarked to Toad as she drew level with him. "I dare say it is," responded Toad politely as he walked along the towpath abreast of her. "I dare say it is a nice morning to them that's not in sore trouble as I am. But here's me married daughter sends off to me to come post-haste, so I come at once fearing the worst, and I've left my washing business and the kids to look after themselves. And on top of that, I've lost my money in my way, and I dread to think what's happened to my daughter." "Well, where might your married daughter be living, ma'am?" asked the bargewoman. "She lives close to a fine house called Toad Hall, which is on the river somewhere in these parts of—" "Toad Hall? Why, I'm going that way myself," replied the bargewoman. "This canal joins the river not far from Toad Hall. You come along with me, I'll give you a lift." Soon they were gliding down the little canal, Toad perched on the side of the barge in a manner most unbecoming even to a washerwoman. "Ha, Toad's luck again," thought he. "I always come out on top." "So you're in the washing business, ma'am," said the bargewoman, "and a very good business you've got, no doubt." "Finest business in the whole country," said Toad airily. "All the gentry come to me, wouldn't go to anyone else if they were paid. They know me so well. You see, I personally supervise all that's done on the premises. Washing, ironing, starching, making up gents' fine shirts for evening wear. Everything's done under my own eyes. Are you fond of washing? Asked the bargewoman thoughtfully. I love it, said Toad. I simply dote on it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in the washtub. What a regular piece of good fortune for both of us, then, that we met, exclaimed the bargewoman. Oh, why do you say that? Asked the Toad nervously. Well, look at me, replied the bargewoman. I like washing too, like yourself, and I have to do my own moving about as I do. But my husband, why, right now he should be attending the barge, but he's gone off with a dog to see if they can pick up a rabbit for supper. So how am I to get on with the washing? Oh, never mind about the washing, said Toad, not liking the subject at all. Try and fix your mind on that rabbit. A nice fat one, I'll be bound. Got any onions? I can't fix me mind on anything but my washing, said the bargewoman. Look, there's a heap of things in my cabin, and as you love washing, if you'll just take one or two of the most necessary, I won't venture to describe them to a lady like you, but you'll recognize them and put them through the wash tub as we go along. It'll be a real help to me. You'll find everything you want below. Toad was now fairly cornered. He looked for escape this way and that, saw that he was too far from the bank for a flying leap, and sullenly resigned himself to his fate. If it comes to that, he thought in desperation, I suppose any fool can wash. And so Toad stood before the washtub. In one hand, the necessaries selected at random from the bargewoman's cabin. In the other, a large bar of soap. And as he stood, he desperately tried to recollect what he'd seen in casual glances through laundry windows. A long half-hour passed, and every minute of it saw Toad getting crosser and crosser. Nothing that he could do to the garments seemed to please them or do them good. He tried coaxing, he tried slapping, he tried punching, but they smiled back at him out of the tub, as happy and unwashed as ever. Once or twice he looked nervously over his shoulder at the bargewoman, but she appeared to be gazing out in front of her, absorbed in her steering. His back ached badly, and he noticed with dismay that his paws were beginning to get all crinkly. Now, Toad was very proud of his paws. He muttered under his breath words that should never pass the lips of either washerwomen or toads, and lost the soap for the 50th time. And even as he was muttering, a large, strong hand fell on his shoulder. Well, 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 said the bargewoman. I've been watching you all the time. I thought you must be humbug all along from the conceited way you talked. Pretty washerwoman you are. Never washed even a dishcloth in your whole life, I'll lay. Toad's temper, which had been simmering viciously for some time, now fairly boiled over, and he lost all control of himself. You common, low, fat bargewoman, he shouted. Washerwoman indeed. I would have you know that I am a toad, a very well-known, respected and distinguished toad. I may be under a bit of a cloud at present, but I will not be laughed at by a bargewoman. The woman moved nearer to him and peered under his bonnet. Well, I never, she cried. You are a toad, a horrid, nasty, crawly toad, and in my nice clean barge too. Now that's one thing I will not have. One big brawny arm shot out and caught Toad by a foreleg, while the other gripped him fast by a hind leg. Going to see a married daughter, indeed. Left the children to look after themselves, have you? Ha! I'll give you, poor old washerwoman. Poor Toad. He was now quite speechless with rage as the bargewoman carried him onto the deck and hurled him over the side. The world turned suddenly upside down. He saw a blur of barge and water, of trees and grass, and he saw the astonished look on the faces of two cows by the water's edge, who never, in their long contented lives, had seen such an incredible sight. The water when he eventually reached it, proved quite cold enough for his taste, though its chill was not sufficient to quell his proud spirit or slake the heat of his fiery temper. He rose to the surface, spluttering, and when he'd wiped the duckweed out of his eyes, the first thing he saw was the fat bargewoman looking back at him over the stern of the retreating barge and laughing. It took Toad a very long time to get to the shore, for the cotton gown greatly impeded his efforts and was immensely tiring. But when he'd regained some of his strength, he gathered his wet skirt well over his arms and ran after the barge as fast as his legs would carry him. He was wild with indignation and thirsting for revenge. The bargewoman was still laughing when he drew level with her. "Put yourself through a mango washer, woman," she called out, "and iron your face, and you'll pass for quite a decent-looking Toad." Toad never paused for a reply. He saw what he wanted ahead of him. Running swiftly on, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope, and cast off. The bargewoman's laughter turned to rage as she saw Toad jump onto the horse's back and urge it to a gallop in the direction of the open country. The wind whistled around him as he sped on. And at last, feeling that both he and the horse could do with a breather, he pulled his steed to a halt on a small hillock. And he looked back over the way he'd come. There in the distance, he could see the small canal. And then he chuckled to himself, for the barge was also visible. It was hard aground on the bank, and on top, he could see a small figure leaping up and down in fury. And Toad's chuckle became a laugh, a mighty laugh, a laugh infectious enough to humor even a horse. And so the horse laughed with him, but it was a long time since he had heard or seen anything funny. They sat on the hill and laughed. They laughed and laughed and laughed. Perhaps Toad would not have laughed so heartily had he known that ahead of him lay more hair-raising adventures and an unexpected meeting with an old friend.